The StA X-3 W.A.S.P Launcher has been officially released shortly following the Killzone collab we got last week, and as always, I unlocked the weapon. Well, it was already unlocked when I logged in, experimented with it in Super Helldive difficulty, played several games, tried it against every enemy and faction in the game, and here is everything you and I need to know about the StA X-3 W.A.S.P Launcher. The W.A.S.P Launcher and the Spear are the only weapons in the game to have a lock-on mechanic, and neither of them can be fired without properly locking on first, meaning any sort of wall or debris in your path to your target may disrupt this weapon's attempt in locking onto the enemy. However, the W.A.S.P Launcher will fit a completely different niche than the Spear will. Matter of fact, I find it to be too specific of a niche, but I digress. The W.A.S.P Launcher specialty is going to be dealing with medium-sized units, not small units, nor massively armored units. Now, that's not to say it can't deal with those units, it definitely can, it just won't be very effective at doing so. Now, what exactly is considered a medium-sized unit? When I say a medium-sized unit, I'm talking about units that fall somewhere in the middle of the pack of each faction. For example, for Illuminates, that's the Overseer and Scout drones. For Automatons, that's like Berserkers, Devastators, and even gunships. For Terminids, that's Alpha Commanders, Hive Guards, and Biospewers, just to name a few. And against these units, the W.A.S.P will absolutely shred. So much so, it might be one of the, if not the best support weapon in the game at dealing with these units. All of the units I've just named, the W.A.S.P will either one hit or two hit kill. We'll talk more in detail of how many shots it takes to deal with each unit a bit later on in the video. Now with that said, despite it being so amazing at dealing with these medium-sized units, it will kind of struggle against either massive units or small units as well. I mean, against massive units, it's not terrible, especially if the enemy in question is not really focusing on you, or you've got a ton of distance between you and the enemy, then yeah, you can lay down some significant damage to it. However, it definitely comes nowhere close to some of the other support weapon choices. As for small units, you can't really lock onto them, so it's pretty obvious as to why it would suck against them. The only alternative would be to use the artillery mode, which we'll talk about in a second. The W.A.S.P Launcher is not the only medium unit dealing support weapon. We've actually got a few of these in Helldivers 2, such as the AMR, the railgun, and the autocannon, just to name a few. I think one of the biggest issues with the W.A.S.P Launcher is with the fact that it's got a lock-on mechanic, and it's got no way to tell the weapon that it's locking onto a target you're not intending to fire at. And it makes it very frustrating to use at times, and makes switching from one target to another very, very slow and very painful to use. In my opinion, the locking on mechanic needs a bit of work, either by adding a mechanic by locking onto multiple targets at once, enabling us to fire at all of them at random, or by allowing us to have a keybind that tells the weapon to relock onto another target. That way we can fire at the first target, press this keybind, and the weapon proceeds to lock onto another target. This would also improve this weapon dramatically. But those are just a couple of ideas. Let's get back to what we have. The weapon has two firing modes. First is the burst mode, which is what I use for 99% of the time, which enables you to fire up to 7 missiles very, very quickly, which deals tons of damage with very decent armor penetration. The second firing mode is the artillery mode, and I'll go ahead and say this, apologies to anyone who enjoys this fire mode, but this fire mode is pretty garbage. This fire mode will fire all of the remaining missiles in your magazine that flies up and then strikes the target from above, creating an airburst explosion very similar to the orbital airburst strike. If you've got only, say, 1 missile left in your mag, you'll get a very tiny airburst strike. If you've got all 7, you'll then get a slightly larger one. Emphasis on slightly. The reason why I truly dislike this fire mode is due to how small the AoE actually is in this artillery mode. You sacrifice a ton of armor penetration for this fire mode, all of your ammo, and the AoE of it is disappointingly small. On top of all of these downsides, it can be fairly difficult to put this firing mode to good use. You'll need a medium-sized unit to be in the middle of a pack filled with smaller units to even gain some sort of value from this artillery mode. But again, the AoE is atrocious. You'll maybe kill a handful of units at best. I mean, one shot from an eruptor or a crossbow or even just a grenade will do a better job than these artillery modes with no downside to it. So this is as far as I'll talk about the artillery mode in this video. I'll only cover the burst mode for this weapon because artillery mode right now is really poor, and pretty much all that you need to know about it is that it definitely needs a buff. Now back onto the burst mode. The Wasp launcher will specialize in dealing with those medium units, ideally at very long ranges, which isn't ideal for solo play, but that's the tiny minority of players. In group play, you'll want to keep your distance and be sniping out units with the extreme range the Wasp enables you to be effective in, which reaches up to 200 meters away. And that makes it for an amazing turret sniping option, as well as getting rid of scout drones from Illuminates and a couple of others. The Wasp has a total of 42 missiles, which I find quite decent if you're not using artillery mode, especially when considering that it only takes 1 to 2 shots for most medium-sized units. The weapon, according to the Helldivers wiki, also has a ton of damage, 200 projectile damage, as well as 600 explosion damage with a 6 armor penetrating value, which may make you wonder, with these insane stats, why the heck would it not be a good support weapon to use against massive units? And the reason for that is because of its lock-on mechanic. When dealing with the massive units, you'll want to focus on their weak spots, such as the Bile Titan's face or the Harvester's leg, for example. But due to the fact that the Wasp launcher will only lock onto the target's center mass, it will fire directly on its most resistant part of the body, therefore requiring far more shots than it would were it to target the unit's weak spot. This is also very noticeable when trying to take down reinforcement ships from Automatons. It only takes about 2 to 3 shots on the engine to take down one of these ships, but since we can't control where it will lock onto it, it will just fire at its center mass, and more often than not, fail at destroying the ship. It will kill the passengers pretty effectively though, all things considered. While on the subject of its inconsistency with laying down damage, comes another inconsistency with the Wasp launcher. The Wasp fires missiles in random directions before it homes into the target, which creates its own fair share of challenges. This means in maps with tons of buildings or trees will decrease this weapon's potential, as it will often end up failing at reaching the target due to it hitting some random tree on the way to its target. Which brings up one of my biggest frustration with the Wasp launcher as well. Due to this random direction upon firing, it may also mean you'll often find yourself doing this. The missiles generally fly upwards right upon firing, but I've noticed when your character flinches when getting struck will oftentimes lead to your character firing the missile at an angle downwards, probably due to the angle at which the Wasp is in your hand when flinching, leading to you just killing yourself. And that's a really big frustration when you use this weapon. Now with all this, what I can say is that the Wasp is incredibly inconsistent, unpredictable, but pretty damn powerful. And with that said, let's try to analyze how many hits it takes to kill each target to end the game. Once again, emphasis on try to analyze, because again, the Wasp locks onto the center mass of the target, but it doesn't always hit the center mass due to the way the weapon fires its missiles, which means the amount of shots it takes to kill, especially massive targets, will vary dramatically. I mean, you can literally only take a few shots to kill a Bile Titan's were the missiles to land on its face, to upwards of literally 20 to 30 shots if it only strikes its center mass. So with that said, when I talk about massive units such as Bile Titans, Harvesters, and heck, even Hulks, know these numbers is just an average amount of shots, but it can and will vary dramatically in your own experience, for better or for worse in different engagements as you go on playing. Now with that said, let's start off with the Illuminates, since we have the least variety in enemy types as of right now. So you cannot target zombies as you may expect, but a well-placed artillery of course will kill a decent chunk of them. But yeah, we're not going to focus on artillery here. As for overseers, whether they're grounded overseers or elevated overseers, the Wasp will very effectively one-hit these units, and as it homes into the target, it will also be one of the best choices, if not the best choice, in the entire game at dealing with elevated overseers. For scout drones, it's also a one-shot kill, but I'd still recommend firing 2 to 3 missiles per scout drone, as your shots can miss. And I really don't think you should risk having a drone call for an entire reinforcement just because you wanted to save a shot here or there. For Harvesters, again, this varies dramatically depending where the shots land, but I found myself mostly taking just slightly over a magazine to kill, I'd give it about an 8 to 9 shot average to kill harvesters, which is not bad considering how fast you can fire this. Now let's go ahead and move on to the Terminids. You won't be able to lock onto scavengers or shriekers or hunters or anything of that size. You'll start locking onto units at warriors or above. And as for warriors, we're looking at 1 shot. We're also looking at 1 shot for hive guards as well. Alpha commanders, which are a huge pain in the ass, are also thankfully a 1 shot. Nursing spewers and even armored spewers are also 1 shot, which makes this amazing at those types of planets. Now moving away from 1-shotting, we've got chargers, and sadly, it's not great against them at all. Not only is it bad in the sense that chargers are always up in your face and you perform best at range with this weapon, but it also will take you in average about 2 to 3 full magazines to kill a charger, which is really terrible considering how many chargers there are. For impalers though, it's kind of weird because we're on a much better note. We're only looking at about a full mag to kill it when it's got its neck down, and only slightly over a mag if we're firing at it from random angles such as its back, and honestly that's pretty good. For Bile Titans, again we're back to horrible inconsistencies, but I found my average amount of shots to take about 3 to 4 full mags depending where the missiles land. But yeah, you're generally going to be looking at easily 20 plus missiles, so it's not ideal there. I shouldn't forget to mention, you can also lock onto spore spewers and shrieker nests, taking upwards of about a full mag-ish to destroy the nests. And you can also weirdly enough lock onto bug holes, albeit it's not ideal and it's a bit inaccurate at that. For automatons, we can't lock onto small troopers, but that's about it. We can lock onto everything else. For devastators, which are overall in my opinion the deadliest type of unit on automatons, we're looking at a 1-hit regardless of their type. It doesn't matter if it's a regular devastator, a rocket devastator, or a heavy shooted devastator, it's a 1-hit for all of them. For berserkers, I'm also happy to say it's also a 1-shot kill. And as for a reinforced rocket strider, we're starting to look at about 2 to 3 shots to kill at its worst. For smaller turrets such as command bunker turrets and mortars and things like that, it will only take 2 shots to kill, which is great for sniping these out. As for the slightly bigger turrets, you're looking at about 3 missiles to destroy. I have had, however, a few times happen where the missile will just land shortly below the turret, requiring far more missiles to destroy, so that's something to keep in mind. As for gunships, I find this to be the best support weapon in the game at dealing with them. 2 quick pop shots will make quick work of the gunships, and only 1 if it lands on an engine. For the dropships, it's not really effective as I said earlier, but if you fire at it when it locks on, it will fire at its center mass, oftentimes landing right in the middle of the passenger crew, killing a ton of reinforcements. As for hulks, this has a very large range of how many shots it can take. I mean, you can literally take only 2 to 3 hits if it lands around its face area, to taking a bit over a full magazine to kill. Either way, it's generally fast, but not great considering its ammo efficiency. For tanks, I've found the average amount of shots to land somewhere around 10 shots or so. Of course, it will matter whether the missiles land on its body, its turret, or its heatsink, but about 10 shots or so is a good average. And as for the automaton final boss, the factory strider, we're looking at around 5 to 6 mags to kill. This is with shots landing on its face, with shots landing on its body, and so on. Either way, it usually takes far too many shots to get an accurate average, but you should note that you can deal significant damage to these factory striders. So if you're equipped with a Wasp launcher, you can most definitely help your team take these big guys down. And lastly, before I forget to mention, it'll take you about 8 shots to get rid of a fabricator as well. So sadly, just a little bit over a mag to get rid of these buildings. So all in all, that's about everything you need to know about the Wasp launcher. My overall thoughts is that the Wasp launcher is great at its very specific niche, but that's also its biggest downside. It's a bit too niche. It's great at those medium units such as, let's say, a hive guard, but terrible against large units such as a charger, but then it improves slightly again being a bit better against massive units such as the Biotitan. So I feel like that statement kinda summarizes the Wasp launcher. It's just such an unpredictable, inconsistent weapon that I definitely do not think will be universally enjoyed by players. I firmly believe the artillery mode deserves a powerful buff, and its lock-on mechanic needs some serious rework or added functionality for it to compete as one of the better support weapons. For right now, I'd give the Wasp launcher about like a C tier for support weapons if I were to put it up on a tier list. And with that said, that pretty much closes the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and maybe learned something new, and as always, I'll catch you legends on the next one.